this past session. We're also joined by the Colorado Refugee Services Program, which is a program within the Colorado Department of Human Services and has long led resettlement efforts in our state. And we're also joined by Representative Crow from District 6 out here in Aurora, joining us as he's been leading really strongly at the federal level to ensure that our allies find safety and sanctuary as the situation in Afghanistan changes. So broadly, the purpose of our meeting is to gather so that we can share information, from the federal government's perspective on the evacuation. So we here as Coloradans can give you guys information about how we're responding, what we're doing, what we anticipate, so everybody feels informed. We also want to take an opportunity to identify some kind of ways that you might get involved as Coloradans, as organizations, or as concerned citizens. So before we get too far along, I do want to do a little bit of a technology check. I do notice there are questions in the chat, but we are actually going to use the Q&A feature here on this webinar this afternoon. So if you do have questions that you'd like to pose during the webinar, please do use that Q&A feature. We will be answering questions as we can towards the end of our agenda today. And quick note that we probably can't get to all of the questions, so bear with us. So we'll try to answer as follow-up after the webinar is over. And for those of you that might have questions related to individuals and individual needs, note that we probably won't be able to answer those on this webinar in this public forum. So just note that. Secondly, if you are joining us and you speak Dari or Pashto, interpretation is available. Meg, if you want to forward to the slide that shows kind of how you can join, it's a little bit confusing. So if you speak Pashto, please look in the bottom bar of this webinar feature. You'll see the interpretation. You should be able to click on Portuguese to find our channel in Pashto. And if you speak Dari, will be able to do so by access that channel by clicking on Spanish. So a little bit funky there, Pashto for Portuguese, Dari for Spanish. So note that as a presenter, I am seeing that we're having a bit of a challenge, if you will, for our ASL interpreter. So just noting that for our co-presenters, we'll get that up and running as we move along. But I'll go over the agenda really quickly. We're going to take a moment here at the very beginning to have a bit of a federal overview of what's been happening for the Afghanistan efforts. Secondly, we'll talk a little bit about what Colorado has been doing. Thirdly, we'll have some input from one of our refugee resettlement agencies. We'll take a pause in section 4, if you will, of our presentation today to talk about challenges and opportunities. And then the section 5 in our agenda is to check in on how you can help and how we can begin to move forward as a state to welcome these newcomers. Thanks so much, Meg. As a round of quick introductions, because we won't do introductions as we go along, our first speaker will be Congressman Crow. I don't think I need to do a lot of introductions for him, but he will be with us, kicking us off. For the Colorado updates and responses, you'll hear from Noyes Combs, who's our state refugee coordinator here in our great state of Colorado, and Meg Segaria Barrett, who leads the integration partnerships work. You'll also hear from me. I am the New American Advisor here in Colorado, tasked with standing up our Office of New Americans. Then you'll hear from Jennifer Wilson, who's the Executive Director of the International Rescue Committee, which is one of the resettlement agencies here in Denver. I think that this is a good reminder to all of our panelists and to me and myself that we do have interpretation going on, so I'll try to speak nice and slowly to make sure that everybody on this call is able to hear and participate. And with that, I will turn it over to Congressman Crow. Welcome.
Hi, Kit. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this Afghan evacuees resettlement town hall. It's truly an honor to be able to do this. This is an issue that has been near and dear to my heart in my work in Congress for a while now. So I wanted to just provide you all an update as to what we have done in the past couple of months and what the next few months look like from a federal level. But first, I want to thank the Office of New Americans. I want to thank Colorado Refugee Services Program, the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for the state of Colorado, the governor's office, and then the IRC, and so many of the other partners. I mean, Colorado is truly unique among states in terms of the ecosystem of organizations, the commitment of our state officials, our local officials, our municipal leaders, as well as our NGO and our nonprofit community on this issue. And it just speaks so much to the fact that we, as a state, recognize the fact that we are a community that is made stronger by our immigrant and refugee community. Like me, I represent a district, one of the most diverse districts in the nation, actually, and the most diverse district in the state of Colorado. And that is a source of great strength for us. We are a more vibrant, stronger, healthy economy and community and neighborhood because of that contribution. And certainly events like that, like this, underscore that. So at a federal level, I want to talk very briefly about what we've done in the last couple of months, and then where we are now and what the next couple of months look like. The first is, we, right after the administration, the president announced the withdrawal of combat forces and the end of our 20-year combat mission in April. I immediately worked with a couple of my colleagues. We put together a bipartisan working group of over 24 members in the House of Representatives called the Honoring Our Promises Working Group. And these are members of Congress who are committed to making sure that we're bringing our Afghan partners, friends, and allies to safety. We put that working group together, and collaboratively, we helped pass two of my bills, the HOPE Act, that actually waived the in-country medical exam requirement for SIV applicants, and then the Allies Act, which increased the cap of the SIV program by 8,000 up to 19,000, and also did a number of streamlining efforts to try to reduce the wait times and the backlog. That passed with an overwhelming majority of 406 votes in late July. That, of course, were two bills that passed before the collapse of the Afghan government in mid-August, but also helped expedite the evacuation. Of course, the government collapsed in mid-August, and that led into a different scenario, a different world, so to speak, for all of us, and including most of which to our Afghan partners and friends. And that set off the civilian evacuation that we saw from middle of August to the end of August. We have there was about 125,000 total folks who were evacuated during that 15-day period. What we're dealing with now in terms of Afghan numbers is about 95,000 of those individuals who were evacuated during that 15-day evacuation. About 95,000 are Afghan men, women, and children who will be brought to the United States. Right now, we're somewhere around 40,000, between 35 and 45,000 that have been brought here over the last couple of weeks. An additional 30,000 or so will be brought in the next few weeks, and then the remainder over the next 12 months. So those are the overall numbers that we are dealing with in terms of the evacuation. Now, what we have to do to deal with and to successfully welcome those 95,000, number one, tomorrow, we're going to be voting on a continuing resolution to fund the government. But part of that CR, what's called a CR vote, is going to be funding several $1 billion of funding to offset and pay for the costs of the evacuation that the US government has already incurred, but also several $1 billion to help fund the current resettlement operations at 8 military installations around the United States and to successfully start the process of integration and welcoming our Afghan friends. In addition to that, this CR vote is going to create, because many of our Afghan friends came in under parole status, so they have only a temporary parole status. This bill, the CR bill, will include a 1-year status to normalize individual status and provide work permits and allow them to access the normal refugee resettlement benefits that would normally be available to a refugee that is not available to a person who's paroled. So it'll fix that element as well. Then the next thing it'll have is it'll have a path after that 1 year towards permanent residence and eventually citizenship as well. So this is a very important bill that we're going to be taking up probably tomorrow, but certainly sometime this week that we have to pass, and we're going to push very hard to pass. In addition to that, we have another bill called the SAVE Act that I've introduced and that I'm also pursuing as an amendment in the DoD budget that we're going to vote on this week. The SAVE Act, what it would do is expand the SIV program eligibility to include those who work for cooperative agreement agencies. So there's a number of agencies that were not the US government, but were funded by the US government in Afghanistan. And currently those individuals who work for those agencies do not qualify for the SIV program. So we're trying to expand the eligibility to allow them to. In addition to that, I think we would be remiss if we did not talk about what we have to do as a community to make sure that we are resettling folks. So those are the legislative efforts. We need to make sure we're expanding eligibility, properly funding this program, continuing to evacuate those out of Afghanistan who were not evacuated in August. But as a community, we have to make sure that we're working collaboratively, which I know this group will, and the leaders on this call will, and I'll work with all of you to open our arms, to be very clear and communicative about what the resettlement process looks like, what the vetting and the protections of that process are, and that we are a community that is going to successfully welcome these new Americans, and we will all be better off for it. Lastly, I will say that if you still have friends and family and contacts who are in Afghanistan, who are not evacuated in August, please contact our office and let us know. We have over 3,500 cases and evacuation requests that my office has submitted in the past month. We continue to work those cases and submit requests for evacuation. So please feel free to contact our office and my team, and we will process those requests if we have not already. We're going to continue to work very hard, and I'm going to continue to push the administration very hard to make sure that we are opening up overland routes of evacuation to bordering countries, that we are surging State Department capacity at our missions for the surrounding countries so that we can process continued evacuations, and that we're working closely with our allies like Qatar and Turkey and others to keep the airport in Kabul open and operating, and to keep commercial air flights moving so that we can keep evacuating folks as quickly and expeditiously as we can. And that's something that I'm committed to and continue to work with the administration to ensure that we're putting out guidelines about the status of all of those efforts. So I'll stop there and look forward to the rest of the program.
Thank you, Congressman, for your time and for your leadership in this effort. I know that it's much appreciated by us here in Colorado and folks across the nation and the world. So thank you so much for everything that you've been doing. So just a note before we go on, we do understand that we're having challenges, if you will, with both our ASL and our DARI interpretation. I think that we would like to apologize for that, and again, ask for your compassion and your patience. If you did sign in, I'm hoping to get DARI translation. We will follow up with you, or ASL interpretation will follow up with you after this webinar. So Meg Noyes, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kit. I will jump in here. A little bit of context on Colorado. Before we jump in with the numbers, people want to know who's coming, when are they coming? Some important context for all of us is the fact that we've done this before. Colorado has been a real place of welcome for refugees for a long time. So we've welcomed more than 60,000 refugees and other eligible individuals to Colorado since 1980. So that's just people coming here newly to Colorado. That doesn't include people who might have come from another state or things like that. So this has been a real place of welcome, specifically for Afghans. So in the last 5 years, this has been the greatest newcomer population through the refugee program here to Colorado. And so one of the things that feels very true for us is that we've welcomed Afghans, we've worked with Afghans, and that Afghans themselves are committed to making Colorado a home, right? Is that they're already pulling together and saying, how can we support our community as they come here to Colorado as well? One of the things I like to remember, and we're going to talk about, hey, these are some of the resources we need, or these are some of the commitments we have to make. one of the returns on that is that when we commit to newcomers, when we commit to refugees as they come to our country, is that we see that in terms of shared benefit, right? So when people can get back into those careers, when kids can be in a school environment and be supported, we see that return, not just for Afghans, but for all of us. And so I want people to kind of think along those lines, is that yes, there is some support needed up front, and that big picture, it's good for all Coloradans, not just Afghans themselves. And that we see people give back. Once people get their feet under themselves, how do they support other newcomers? How do they give back by speaking about their experience? How do they start businesses and things like that? So some big picture reasons why Colorado can welcome, how we've done it before, and the fact that it's good for us all. So that's kind of the big picture here. And this little picture of a family welcoming folks. I like this. This next picture is really looking at big picture. What are some of the services here in Colorado? And so in the gray, you have basically a landscape of what are the core services that the resettlement agencies and some of our other partners through the state refugee office, what are some of those services that we offer to really get people stabilized at the outset? It's all stuff that you would expect, and I won't go into great detail here, but supporting people with cultural orientation, supporting people with ESL, workforce development kinds of services, mental health, behavioral health, connection to primary care. So all of that stuff is stuff that we have in place. We'll talk a little bit more about continued services and what we're building and putting in place for Afghans as they come. The second piece is the broader community. So we know that the broader community chips in as well. Schools are a part of this effort. The public health system is a part of this effort. We've got other players who are really contributing as well, and also allowing newcomers to give back, becoming citizens ultimately, and things like that. So just a big landscape overview of what refugee services looks like, and it really is the full community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Noise and help with this interpreter.
Thanks, Meg. You can go to the next slide. So despite fleeing for similar reasons, these individuals will arrive under different immigration statuses. So the three immigration categories are US citizen and legal permanent resident, special immigrant visa. So SIVs are typically individuals who interpreted for our Army or assisted the mission in some capacity. And then also there are folks that will receive humanitarian parole. So humanitarian parole allows for admission to the US due to an emergency. It's a temporary status that will be valid for 2 years. This status will allow individuals to apply for asylum and work authorization. However, they will not be eligible for many federal benefits or for Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR-funded refugee resettlement programming. And as Congressman Crow mentioned, this will be the largest cohort of evacuees that are being resettled. Meg, you can go to the next slide. So individuals were evacuated from Afghanistan. They went over to what's called lily pad sites. These are bases overseas. There they received some health screening, security vetting, and processing. They then went on to the US, either through the Philadelphia or Dulles airport. They were COVID tested, and they moved on to 8 military bases. The vast majority of Afghan nationals evacuated are still on those 8 military bases. We have federal partners working on processing, such as USCIS or CDC. Some of that processing includes health screening, vaccinations for polio, MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, and COVID. There's a 21-day stay requirement post-vaccines to ensure the health and safety of both the Afghan arrivals as well as our US communities. Individuals need to quarantine if they were COVID positive. And then there's also applications for employment authorization cards and other necessary steps to ensure that they have what they need to start rebuilding their lives here in our communities. National resettlement agencies have cooperative agreements with the Department of State to receive and place refugees and SIVs across the country. Evacuees will be served through the existing resettlement infrastructure. Part of processing includes assuring cases to final destinations. So here in Colorado, we do anticipate the bulk of arrivals coming to Metro Denver, and then some also coming to Colorado Springs. Communities with the highest Afghan arrivals will be Northern Virginia and Sacramento, where large Afghan communities already exist. And as mentioned, while humanitarian parolees are not eligible for ORR-funded refugee resettlement programming, they will have access to initial services available through the resettlement agencies through a program called the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program, APA, which Jennifer Wilson from the IRC will discuss shortly. Next slide, Meg. So the expected impact on Colorado, probably the slide that many have been waiting for. Obviously, we expect an increase in Afghan arrivals here in Colorado. We think about 90% in Metro Denver and about 10% of the arrivals we receive in Colorado Springs, though other communities could receive arrivals. If folks have friends or family in other communities, they're more likely to go there. You may have seen news reports that we may receive 865 arrivals in our first cohort. However, we are planning for expected numbers between 1,000 and 2,000 arrivals based on historical resettlement patterns. We have had a few handful or so of evacuees arrive, and the resettlement agencies have been alerted to expect an increase in arrivals starting in mid-October through the end of the year. So we expect arrivals to start to ramp up and then sort of go like this throughout the end of the year. The vast majority, as folks have said, will be on that humanitarian parole, which is a new status for the refugee resettlement agencies to serve. I think it's back to you, Kit.
Thanks, Noise. A quick note before we go too much further. As Representative Crow stated, we're very lucky to be in Colorado with the programs and services that Meg and Noise just described. And we're really excited by the work that Congressman Crow is doing at the federal level. So excited that we allowed him to leave the webinar early to get back to work on the continuing resolution. And we hope that that moves forward in a way that will provide services for folks here in Colorado. But regardless of what happens on the federal level, we as Coloradans always want to know and ensure that we can take care of people who live and reside in our state. That includes everybody in our virtual room here today, and this definitely includes our most newest neighbors, which will be a lot of these Afghan evacuees. We're committed to being partners to the federal government, and we're committed to being partners to the U.S. military and our veteran communities as we welcome these newcomers. The next slide, Meg. So as part of that commitment, a few weeks ago, we stood up here in Colorado a unified command group. So the mission is on your screens so that you can see it. But in general, what we want to be able to do is wrap our arms around the existing infrastructure here in Colorado. Teams like Jennifer's at the International Rescue Committee, teams like Emily Griffith helping people obtain credentials towards long-term career paths. How do we wrap our arms around that infrastructure, knowing that some of the levers that they have traditionally used over time for refugees and SIVs may not be there in the same instance for people who are going to arrive on humanitarian parole? We are hopeful, like Congressman Crow mentioned, that the federal government allows a fix, but we also think that we'll see a number of arrivals before that actually comes to fruition. And we also know that there are challenges that all newcomers to Colorado have, and especially newcomers who often, if you fled from Afghanistan, might have fled with just the clothes on your back. So how do we as Coloradans want to welcome? We want to welcome in a way that not only is about initial welcome, but is also about setting people up on the path to success over the long term. So our unified command group has been focusing on those areas of greatest need while also trying to be inclusive and also thinking about how do we set people up for success over the long term so that they may contribute in the ways that we know all immigrants do, and they can quickly give back to the communities that welcome them. So some of the key areas that you'll see there is, short-term and long-term housing. We all know that housing is the key to employment and to education opportunities, and housing is oftentimes the thing that you need most to feel at home in a new community. We're also really keen in on what our health response looks like. What might be somebody's physical or mental health needs. These could be ongoing conditions, such as a cardiovascular issue that has plagued somebody for decades, or this might be a newer issue, like what it meant to flee and cross over Taliban lines on your way to the airport. We also want to make sure that we are meeting people where they need for food stability, for employment and training, and for legal services, knowing that people might have a long pathway until they get citizenship. Thanks, and the next slide. Lead partners in this particular unified command group are participants on this call today. So the Office of New Americans, which I'm here to represent. We serve in the Office of New Americans, all Coloradans, regardless of status. And we do so through cross-agency partnerships. Why this is important is because it's going to take a multi-sectorial approach to welcome Afghans in the way that we want to as Coloradans. We partner with our federal government to include the White House and the Department of Homeland Security. Our second kind of lead partner is Noyes and Meg team over at the Colorado Refugee Services Program. As previously mentioned, the refugee program oversees and coordinates the existing refugee resettlement infrastructure and will be a key lead in our ability to respond as Coloradans to this recent humanitarian situation. Our third partner is the Division of Emergency Management. Emergency management serves all Coloradans in instances of emergencies or facing emergency needs, and we're happy to have them as co-leads as they commonly work with a lot of our organizations like the Salvation Army or the Red Cross to respond to emergency needs. So we feel like with these three distinct partners with different sort of focuses and different strengths really brings to the forefront the best in Colorado, if you will, to lead us through these next couple of weeks and months as we welcome Afghan evacuees. Next slide, Meg. So our Colorado approach and our Colorado for All is multi-sectoral, coordinated, collaborative, and agile. So we want to make sure that we have experts in housing, and that we have experts in employment, we have experts in serving Afghans, that we have everybody to the table to make sure that we're drawing on the expertise that we have in our great state to carry this mission forward. We want to make sure that we coordinate across sectors and partners, and this is really key because we know that when we invest in people up front when they arrive here, people are able to integrate over time, and that integration brings mutual benefit to us all. And thirdly, we want to collaborate because again, we know that we have expertise in Colorado that we can lean on to make this happen, but each person's expertise is unique. And so we want to build a team to make sure that we put the best players, if you will, on the field as we begin to respond to this. And fourth, which is maybe the most important thing in this dynamic situation, is that we remain agile. As Congressman Crow mentioned, there may be changes at the federal government that may change our response here, but we still want to lead with our value that we want to welcome all Coloradans or all newcomers in our Colorado way, if you will. And to do that, we may need to be agile as things change at the federal level or even at the international level. Next slide. So with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer Wilson, who's here with us from the International Rescue Committee.
Thank you, Kit, and thank you to everyone who's in attendance today and to our panelists. Really grateful to have the opportunity to share a little bit of the resettlement agency perspective. And I am here representing the International Rescue Committee, or IRC, but also speaking to issues that I know our colleagues at African Community Center and Lutheran Family Services are also encountering. Before I start with anything, I just want to say thank you. We're so incredibly fortunate in this state for the leadership of our governor, Governor Polis, of Congressman Crow, of Kit in her capacity with the Office of New Americans, and Noyes and her team at the Colorado Refugee Services Program, and for all of the state agencies that have stepped forward to try to support this effort. In addition, we have an incredible community, as Congressman Crow noted, a wonderful Afghan community that's here ready to support new Afghans coming in, incredible faith-based organizations, businesses, all manner of service organizations, school groups, people stepping forward. And that is really something to be thankful for in our state. I represent the IRC, and we are one of 9 national resettlement agencies. We partner with the Department of State to welcome refugees into our community. So we, along with our colleague resettlement agencies, are really the first base with people who are arriving here. We welcome them at the airport. We work on housing. We get them connected to services. We support English language acquisition, coordinate referrals, employment, health, all manner of things that you can imagine that people need when they first come in. And we don't do it alone. We do it with a much larger ecosystem of partners. We have a long history of serving Afghans. As was mentioned prior, Afghans are one of the largest populations, actually the largest population we've resettled in the last 5 years. And so we do have relationships with the local Afghan communities, as well as people who have built their own relationships with Afghans over the years. And we are deeply troubled and saddened by the current state of affairs. We are feeling for those who have loved ones and family who are stuck in Afghanistan. We recognize there are few, if any, good options for people to get to safety now. And we also know that it's been an incredibly distressing time for Afghans and for those who served the US mission alongside Afghans, those who know Afghans in our community. So we are doing our best to support and really want to lift up how incredible the strength and the assets of the Afghan community are. So we are really looking to work in partnership with all of you, if you're on this call, to make sure that together we're able to offer as much support as possible to evacuees. We operate resettlement programs, and this instance is no different, through a public-private partnership model. And so that means that the private or local community contribution, engagement, support is as important, if not more important sometimes, as the resources that come from the public through federal, through state. But really those things combined help to create an environment where people can succeed. And so we are really looking to ensure that with the state, federal, and local resources, whether they're public or private, we have the financial resources, the in-kind, or maybe you think of them as donated goods and materials, and also the volunteer support to walk with people as they seek to rebuild their lives here. That being said, for resettlement agencies, or RAs, as you see in this acronym, we are balancing a line between serving people and planning and preparing to serve a pretty significant number of Afghans and responding to an incredible outpouring of support and generosity from the community. So we are seeking and finding ways to streamline our efforts to accept donations, to engage volunteers, and really trying to prioritize and triage so that we can use this space for a couple of weeks before we see increased arrivals to get all of the service infrastructure in place. So if you're on this call and you've reached out to donate goods, or you've reached out to volunteer, and maybe you're frustrated that it's taking a while to get back to you. I ask for your patience and your grace. We're trying to juggle a lot to build these systems of support pretty quickly. And along those lines, we are grateful that the Department of State, which is our partner for many decades in the resettlement program, quickly stood up what's called the APA, or Afghan Parolee Assistance Program. Afghan Placement and Assistance. I always say parolee, and I typed it in this slide, Afghan Placement and Assistance, APA. That program is essentially the same for initial services as what refugees receive. And so we are building that program to ensure that there is an initial effort to stabilize people. Typically for refugees, that rolls over into a much broader set of services that is designed to really support people for up to 5 years as they pursue integration. At present, given the things that have been noted by Congressman Crow and others on the panels, we are working to try to mobilize the resources and support that will parallel what refugees normally get through the Unified Command Group and through engagement of our public and private partners. So we know that it's not perfect, but we are working to make sure that those things are as similar as they can possibly be, noting that there are some limitations because of eligibility of humanitarian parolees. We are incredibly grateful for all of these concerted efforts, again, really trying to do our best to plan and prepare and leverage all of the incredible resources in the state of Colorado and in our local communities. And I am going to actually hold off on the other requested support because I think we'll review some more concrete details of that as we go forward. But would love to have you all engaged and supporting and know that you are on this call out of a desire to do that. So we look forward to the work ahead. With that, I'll hand back over to Kit.
Thanks, Jennifer. So we're seeing a lot of good questions in the Q&A. So just note, we're going to hold those questions until later in the presentation. And I know that our Dari interpretation is back up. If you do need it, to go ahead and select Spanish at the interpretation at the bottom of your screen. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities and how you can help. We know that Colorado, as Jennifer mentioned, has always opened its arms to newcomers, including refugees. And we have some ideas, if you will, about how we can build upon that and amplify it in the weeks and months ahead. The next slide, please, Meg. Perfect. So again, just a reminder, if you will, about what our goal is here as Colorado, is again to maximize the community capacity to welcome Afghan evacuees through being agile, coordinated, collaborative, multi-sectoral, all of the ways in which we get good work done here in our state, and all towards the goal to ensuring every arrival has access to the supports that they need. And this is really key for us, again, because we know when we invest in people, when people have housing and food stability over time, this does bring mutual benefit back to our Colorado communities as we're able to integrate and include many of these newcomers. The next slide. Great. So, this is just a little snapshot of, sort of what we've got going on for us, if you will, here in Colorado, assets that we bring as individuals and as residents of the state, and also some challenges that we see coming along. As Jennifer mentioned before, we do have the infrastructure to do this, but that does not necessarily mean that the infrastructure right now has the resources and capacity to do this the way that they would like to see it done, being perfectionists themselves, as most nonprofits are, over the next couple of weeks. So some really great stuff that we've got going on in Colorado is, all of you guys know that we have a lot of strong employment opportunities and outcomes. There's a lot of businesses in need of the sort of ingenuity and skills that a lot of these Afghan evacuees are going to have. And we've got a lot of new state laws that offer housing assistance and credentials, occupational credentials that is, to all Coloradans regardless of status. And so whether or not an Afghan comes in with an SIV visa or a refugee status or even humanitarian parolee, we know that there are things that we'll be able to do because of the forethought of a lot of our legislative members, if you will, over the last couple of years. We have participated in this, as we've said before. So some of you on this call have been longtime supporters of the refugee resettlement infrastructure. And so this might hark back, if you will, to when we were resettling Kosovars, or maybe all the way back to when we were resettling Vietnamese. So we do know how to do this, and we have a traditional welcome here in Colorado that we just need to amplify, but not necessarily build from scratch. Jennifer mentioned again that Coloradans definitely want to get involved. You guys are here, we're here, we are Coloradans, and we really want to lean into this. You know, one other thing that we always like to point out is that we do have strong Afghan communities here. Many of you are on this call, and we appreciate you. But a lot of strong veteran communities as well, who worked with interpreters or other folks overseas, and they want to be able to return the favor, if you will, of working alongside them as people rebuild their lives here. You know, that being said, with all of the assets that we do have challenges. You know, we do know that stability is a little bit more challenging, if you will, for Afghan parolees that might not have the same levers, if you will, towards food assistance or Medicaid, for instance, or housing assistance from families and friends. So we do know that this is going to be a challenge, but we feel like this is a challenge that we can meet together. You know, mental health services is going to need to be a real place in which we lean in. A lot of recent trauma will be amongst the evacuees from Afghanistan, which I think we can all understand. And so we do need sort of the partnership of our community mental health organizations and other partners in the community as we begin to move this forward. You know, we've mentioned some of the other challenges related to legal services. And again, just sort of noting that the resettlement agencies are gearing up for these folks' arrivals in the next couple of weeks. And so staffing is always a challenge if you are a nonprofit, and B, if you are a nonprofit that's expecting, you know, additional needs from your community members over the next couple of weeks. So next slide. So, you know, there are things that we can do together. You know, we did mention a lot of these challenges, but there are good things. So in bullet number 2, you'll see that even though folks will be arriving in Colorado on humanitarian parole, we actually do have a number of support services here in our state that they can lean on and lean into as they rebuild their lives. So note, importantly, pregnant women and children, no matter their status, will be eligible to apply for Medicaid. We know that we'll have better health outcomes for these individuals and begin to respond to the health and well-being of our state at large through connecting people with healthcare. And so health insurance, of course, is a big part of our connection. We know that children that are on humanitarian parolee status will be eligible for SNAP, otherwise known as food assistance. And again, some of the laws that our legislature passed last session, including dropping lawful presence from a requirement for a housing assistance, will be another place that we'll be able to lean in and help people along their paths. But regardless, existing and new partners will really need to lean in to wrap around additional supports to Colorado's refugee resettlement infrastructure. That's the purpose of the UCG, is to bring new partners in, whether they are municipal partners, whether they are partners in disaster and emergency management. We're really thinking about the ways that we can coordinate and collaborate with partners with expertise in order to amplify and to be agile in the months ahead. So next slide. But I do have a way that those of you who are on this call who might have additional means or additional ways to support. We are launching the Colorado Afghan Evacuee Support Fund. This is a centralized fund where we can collect donations from individuals like you or other Colorado community members or philanthropy to really focus a lot of the resources that we have as a state in order to give to Jennifer's organization or other organizations that are going to work alongside Afghans. So note that this is newly launched as of this afternoon. We can accept donations now, but as we sort of move forward in the months and weeks ahead, donations are going to be really key for us to be able to offer stability and opportunity for the newcomers in the way that Colorado always has and always wants to be able to do. The next slide. So this is sort of an overview, if you will, of the fund and its purpose. We are being fiscally sponsored by the Rose Community Foundation. So thank you to Rose and our other philanthropic partners who have helped us so far in this. But basically, again, we want to be able to farewell and to welcome people into Colorado through offering them services and supports that we know that they'll have over the next couple of weeks and months, but then also be planning for the long term. What does it mean as you rebuild your life here in Colorado, and what might you need in order to be successful in our community? So we're really excited about this. We're looking forward to partnering with you again as we move ahead and welcoming these newcomers. Next slide. But beyond money, which is always important when you're responding quickly to anything, and especially in this situation, there are always other ways to help. So one thing we always like to ask is, are you an employer? You might have the need, if you will, in your workforce with a lot of the skills and the aptitudes that Afghans are going to bring. As a reminder, and Noyes mentioned this a lot earlier in the presentation, but a lot of Afghans are going to come over with backgrounds in interpretation, construction, accounting, all of those sort of backroom functions that make our military operate. People are going to come over with those skill sets. So maybe you need that skill set. You can connect with a workforce center in your area or with a resettlement agency directly if you do have employment opportunities that you think Afghans will be ready and willing to sort of do. Note that everybody is unique. We all have different jobs as we sit around this virtual room. Every Afghan will also be unique. So even if you're not sort of top of mind, I wonder or not whether this would be a good fit for a newcomer. I bet it would be, and a lot of the different skills and a lot of the different aptitudes that people bring. Secondly, are you a landlord? Because if you're a landlord, you are our new best friend, because housing stability is the key to making sure that people get started on a good foot here in their new home of Colorado. So if you do have a long-term rental, I'm sure the resettlement agencies would love for you to reach out. A challenge for newcomers can be that they might not have past rental histories, or they might not yet have a job. And this shouldn't scare you off, because the resettlement agency is going to work with you to make sure this is a good tenant for you. But it does make renting a lot more challenging, especially if those rentals are owned by more corporate sorts of agencies. So if you are more a local landlord, or maybe you're a landlord with a few rentals, definitely reach out to the resettlement agencies, because they can need your help. And then, what has become clear over the last couple of weeks, and what's been clear for a number of years, is we do need Dari and Pashto speakers. So if you're on this call and that's a skill set that you have, you can reach out directly to Chris. The addresses on the email addresses on the slide, or directly to a resettlement agency to get connected, so that you can help these newcomers with the skills that you have. So Jennifer, I'll turn it over for you for this next slide.
Great, thank you, Kit, and thanks for highlighting all of the different ways that people can engage. And I think, again, it's incredibly critical that we're all involved and we're supportive, and that is going to help us be successful in welcoming our new Afghan neighbors. As Kit mentioned, many volunteer opportunities at resettlement agencies and other refugee service providers. Also, Congressman Crow spoke to the legislation that is being pursued to provide a fix for eligibility for different services and for legal status for Afghans who are paroled. If you are interested in staying tuned to those latest developments and being engaged in that, we encourage you to sign up for SMS text message alerts at act.rescue.org. You'll see that address here in the slide. Also, we have lots of opportunities for people to be mentors, professional mentors, to help people get into their careers of choice. And I think that's across many different agencies and service providers. If you have a home that you would like to make available for an Afghan individual or family, you can sign up to be a host on Airbnb's Open Homes platform. And then, of course, as Kit mentioned, the financial donations that will be needed to help with all manner of basic needs and to give people a good start are going to be routed through the funds for Afghan support, with the URL there, the link to donate. So all of those things are incredibly helpful, and thank you so much for your interest in being part of it.
So I will chime in with a couple of ways to stay engaged. We have about 200 people on the call. These are people who give of their time, of their energy, and really what can we do to keep supporting you all to chip in and to support in the ways that you would like to. A couple of print resources, online resources, quite frankly, that we are about to release. The first one is looking at the different benefit eligibility for Afghans. And this is really a review of both state programs and then also federal programs too. This is going through a final review, so it's not been published yet. The real intent is that we as the state are providing guidance to program administrators in all of the counties in Colorado to say, okay, based on some of these different immigration statuses that we discussed, this person would or wouldn't be eligible for this particular program. So to provide really clear guidance, particularly for those folks who administer programs, but that we would be sharing this document broadly. The second resource is really core programs and services. And this is really intended to be community facing. So if someone came and joined you up in Boulder and you said, hey, where do I start? Well, you start at the resettlement agency. Here's the phone number for the resettlement agency. Here's an email address. Here's really the right way to plug into those services. It's not the full suite of services. We've got a lot of other partners who want to give and support, but really these are good places to start. So those are things that will be coming out. We'll be publishing those on the state refugee website, but things just to be keeping your eyes out for. Couple more places just to be learning more information. One of them is an FAQ document. You may have seen this. It's at a persistent bit.ly link. So that FAQ address is always the same. And you can go there. We're trying to update it about every 2 weeks with new information as we have it. You can see that the information is kind of unfolding throughout time, and we're trying to be transparent around releasing that when we feel that we have good information to release. So that's on the state refugee website, which is the second bullet point here. So that's the Colorado Refugee Services Program website. So be looking there, particularly for the FAQ, but also for some of those other resources that I referenced. Last but not least, the Colorado Refugee Connect website. Big picture, kind of some good educational resources for understanding refugee resettlement process, some of the cultures and communities that we serve. And then our Facebook page will be a good resource for some of the news about this, some of the ways to connect as our response evolves. And that's on Facebook, so you can follow that group on Facebook as well. One thing I haven't done, because it's challenging to do, is check the chat. I know I have colleagues supporting the chat, checking the chat. Are there any questions that we would want to answer live, or have we been able to manage those in real time?
So I'll start with a question that I saw come up in the chat that I'm not sure that we've answered yet. Jennifer, there was some confusion around what to do if you're a landlord with a long-term rental or a short-term rental with Airbnb. So we might have had the same information, but maybe a little bit cross-purpose. So can you help clear that up for us?
Sure. If you're a landlord or property manager who's interested in renting to Afghans, there are a couple of different options. We work with a broad set of landlords and property managers. Typically, we are looking to get people into long-term housing as quickly as possible. Airbnb is not a long-term housing option. Airbnb is best for shorter-term stays. So while we are welcoming people, we may have a situation where we have them stay in temporary housing for a period of time as we line up permanent housing. And so if you have a shorter term option, Airbnb through their open homes platform is a great way to go. We've worked with them for many years, and it's a great setup where you can sign up and then we can send booking requests and you can manage through the Airbnb platform. However, again, our goal is to get people into permanent, stable, safe, sanitary housing, and ideally as affordable as possible. Affordable in Colorado is relative. So that's a kind of different set potentially of housing needs where we don't have, a central platform like open homes. So that's when it would be best to directly contact the resettlement agency, or as noted earlier, contact CRISP and they can help to disseminate that information.
Great. So as I understand it, I think we're working to answer via the Q&A. A couple remaining questions. I know questions have come in towards the end, so we might take a minute or two to kind of finalize a couple of responses to those Q&As, recognizing that a couple of those questions we may not have full answers for at this moment, but we are tracking those questions as well. So just trying to be able to respond as best as we can.
And Meg, I see Amanda has submitted a question regarding family reunification, and Nick has answered. I want to be really candid that for those whose loved ones are still in Afghanistan, we have very few options at present, and we have no good options at present to get them out. For those who are outside of Afghanistan or have the capacity to get outside of Afghanistan, the picture looks a little different. We are hoping that will change with time, but that is the reality right now. So while I know that all three of our agencies are fielding calls, that's African Community Center, Lutheran Family Services, and the IRC, I just want to be very frank that the options are limited for those who are still in country in Afghanistan. Marissa, I see your question about open homes. Is that for no cost hosting? So my understanding is that it is still for either no cost or reduced cost hosting. So I believe you should be able to sign up as a host with either option.
I can also circle back around to a question that's come up around sort of employers or businesses and how they can be involved. I do think, and Jennifer, Meg, Noyes, please jump in here, but for those who have been working alongside refugees for a long time, we know that employment is the answer to integration. And we also know that it will take time post-arrival for someone to feel like they're ready to sort of step inside into a new job. So we've got a little bit of a time to figure this out, which is why we really encourage folks to reach out to resettlement agencies if you do have business openings that you'd like to understand whether or not that might be a good fit for Afghan evacuees, or you can reach out to workforce centers who can also help you as a business sort of vet those sorts of things. The things that'll be looked at are, where is it? Does it allow transportation? What is the wage? What is the career growth? The same sorts of questions that any sort of new hire would have for your business. Those are the types of questions that Afghans and refugee resettlement agencies will have as they begin to determine what is a good fit for an individual and what is a good fit for your business.
I also see Amanda Dahl had asked a question earlier on about the contact at Congressman Crow's office for evacuation requests. Amanda, there are two different Amandas who asked questions. So my live response was responding to her about family in Afghanistan. But I did include contact information for Ali DeWills-Marcano. She's a senior constituent advocate in Congressman Crow's office, and she would be your best point of contact. If something has changed and they're routing those to somebody else, she can tell you who that is, but she's the person we've been working with.
And for those of you who would like to know, Congressman Crow's office line is 202-225-7882, and I'll put that in the chat as well. All right, well, I think that we have managed to answer most of the questions, if you will, in the chat today. We'll be following up with those of you who we were not able to answer the questions for. Noyes, Jennifer, any final questions that you would like to answer? Any final words?
I didn't see any final questions, but just a thanks and appreciation for everybody's interest and efforts on this.
Yes, thank you. I, have worked in resettlement for a long time and in a number of different communities, and can say that while this is certainly going to be full of challenges and opportunities, there's no other place that I want to do this. And I hope that through our concerted efforts and our collaboration, we will be able to afford the kind of welcome that recently evacuated Afghans deserve. So we're grateful for your partnership, for your time, and look forward to all that is ahead.
Thank you. This has been a great hour to spend on a Monday afternoon. Again, as our seasons change into fall, we're also getting ready for lots of change, if you will, in the weeks ahead to welcome our Afghan evacuees. Again, we have just launched our Colorado Afghan Evacuee Response Fund today. So I did see some questions come up in the chat about that, and I'll get back to you guys individually about the details. But thanks again for your compassion and patience as we remain agile, if you will, as we as Colorado respond. So with that, I think we'll conclude our webinar today. Thanks again. Bye.